The American Claimant by Mark Twain. Chapter 22. 5 minutes later, he was sitting in his room with his head bowed within the circle of his arms on the table, final attitude of grief and despair. His tears were flowing fast, and now and then a sob broke upon the stillness. Presently he said, "I knew her when she was a little child and used to climb about my knees. I love her as I love my own, and now, oh, poor thing, I cannot bear it. She's gone and lost her heart to this mangy material Aziz. Why didn't we see that might happen? But how could we? Nobody could. Nobody could ever have dreamed of such a thing. You couldn't expect a person would fall in love with a waxwork, and this one doesn't even amount to that." He went on grieving to himself, and now and then giving voice to his lamentations. "It's done, oh, it's done, and there's no help for it, no undoing their miserable business. If I had the nerve, I would kill it. But that wouldn't do any good. She loves it. She thinks it's genuine and authentic. If she lost it, she would grieve for it just as she would for a real person. And who's to break it to the family? Not I. I'll die first. Sellers is the best human being I ever knew, and I wouldn't any more think of, oh dear, why, it'll break his heart when he finds it out. And Polly's too. This comes of meddling with such infernal matters. But for this, the creature would still be roasting in Sheol where it belongs. How is it that these people don't smell the brimstone? Sometimes I can't come into the same room with him without nearly suffocating." After a while, he broke out again. "Well, there's one thing sure. The materializing has got to stop right where it is. If she's got to marry a specter, let her marry a decent one out of the Middle Ages, like this one, not a cowboy and a thief such as this protoplasmic tadpole's going to turn into if Sellers keeps on fussing at it. It costs $5,000 cash and cuts down on the incorporated company to stop the works at this point. But Sally Sellers' happiness is worth more than that." He heard Sellers coming and got himself to rise. Sellers took a seat and said, "Well, I've got to confess, I'm a good deal puzzled. It did certainly eat. There's no getting around it. Not eat exactly either, but it nibbled in an appetiteless way, but still it nibbled. And that's just a marvel. Now the question is, what does it do with those nibblings? That's it. What does it do with it? My idea is that we don't begin to know all there is to this stupendous discovery yet. But time will show, time and science. Give us a chance and don't get impatient." But he couldn't get Hawkins interested. Couldn't make him talk to amount to anything. Couldn't drag him out of his depression. But at last he took a turn that arrested Hawkins' attention. "I'm coming to like him, Hawkins. He is a person of stupendous character, absolutely gigantic. Under that placid exterior is concealed the most daredevil spirit that was ever put into a man. He's just a Clive over again. Yes, I'm all admiration for him on account of his character, and liking naturally follows admiration, you know. I'm coming to like him immensely. Do you know I haven't the heart to degrade such a character as that down to the burglar estate for money or for anything else. And I've come to ask you if you are willing to let the reward go and leave this poor fellow where he is? Yes, not bring him down to date. Oh, there's my hand, and my heart's in it too. I'll never forget you for this, Hawkins, said the old gentleman in a voice which he found it hard to control. You are making a great sacrifice for me, and one which you can ill afford, but I'll never forget your generosity, and if I live, you shall not suffer for it. Be sure of that. Sally Sellers immediately and vividly realized that she was become a new being, a being of a far higher and worthier sort than she had been such a little while before, an earnest being in place of a dreamer, and supplied with a reason for her presence in the world, where merely a wistful and troubled curiosity about it had existed before. So great and so comprehensive was the change which had been wrought, that she seemed to herself to be a real person who had lately been a shadow, a something which had lately been a nothing, a purpose which had lately been a fancy, a finished temple with the altar fires lit and the voice of worship ascending, where before had been but an architect's confusion of arid working plans, unintelligible to the passing eye and prophesying nothing. Lady Gwendolen. The pleasantness of that sound was all gone. It was an offense to her ear now. She said, "There, that sham belongs to the past. I will not be called by it any more. I may call you simply Gwendolen? You will allow me to drop the formalities straightway and name you by your dear first name without additions?" She was dethroning the pink and replacing it with a rosebud. "There, that is better. I hate pink, some things. Indeed, yes, you are to call me by my first name without additions. That is, well, I don't mean without additions entirely, but..." It was as far as she could get. There was a pause. His intellect was struggling to comprehend. Presently it did manage to catch the idea in time to save embarrassment all around, and he said gratefully, "Dear Gwendolen, I may say that?" "Yes, part of it. But don't kiss me when I am talking. It makes me forget what I was going to say. You can call me by part of that form, but not the last part. Gwendolen is not my name." "Not your name?" This in a tone of wonder and surprise. The girl's soul was suddenly invaded by a creepy apprehension, a quite definite sense of suspicion and alarm. She put his arms away from her, looked him searchingly in the eye, and said, "Answer me truly, on your honor. You are not seeking to marry me on account of my rank." The shot almost knocked him through the wall. He was so little prepared for it. There was something so finely grotesque about the question and its apparent suspicion that he stopped to wonder and admire, and thus was he saved from laughing. Then, without wasting precious time, he set about the task of convincing her that he had been lured by herself alone and had fallen in love with her only, not her title and position, that he loved her with all his heart and could not love her more if she were a duchess, or less if she were without home, name, or family. She watched his face wistfully, eagerly, hopefully, translating his words by its expression. And when he had finished, there was gladness in her heart, a tumultuous gladness, indeed, though outwardly she was calm, tranquil, even judicially austere. She prepared a surprise for him now, calculated to put a heavy strain upon those disinterested protestations of his. And thus she delivered it, burning it away word by word as the fuse burns down to a bombshell, and watching to see how far the explosion would lift him. "Listen, and do not doubt me, for I shall speak the exact truth. Howard Tracy, I am no more an earl's child than you are." To her joy, and secret surprise also. It never fazed him. He was ready this time and saw his chance. He cried out with enthusiasm, "Thank heaven for that!" and gathered her to his arms. To express her happiness was almost beyond her gift of speech. "You'll make me the proudest girl in all the earth," she said, with her head pillowed on his shoulder. "I thought it only natural that you should be dazzled by the title, maybe even unconsciously, you being English, and that you might be deceiving yourself and thinking you loved only me, and find you didn't love me when the deception was swept away. So it makes me proud that the revelation stands for nothing and that you do love just me. Only me. Oh, prouder than any words can tell. It is only you, sweetheart. I never gave one envying glance toward your father's earldom. That is utterly true, dear Gwendolyn." "There, you mustn't call me that. I hate that false name. I told you it wasn't mine. My name is Sally Sellers, or Sarah, if you like. From this time I banish dreams, visions, imaginings, and will no more of them. I am going to be myself, my genuine self, my honest self, my natural self, clear and clean of sham and folly and fraud, and worthy of you. There is no grain of social inequality between us. I, like you, am poor. I, like you, am without position or distinction. You are a struggling artist. I am that too in my humbler way. Our bread is honest bread. We work for our living. Hand in hand we will walk hence to the grave, helping each other in all ways, living for each other, being and remaining one in heart and purpose, one in hope and aspiration, inseparable to the end. And though our place is low, judged by the world's eye, we will make it as high as the highest in the great essentials of honest work for what we eat and wear, and conduct above reproach. We live in a land, let us be thankful, where this is all sufficient, and no man is better than his neighbor by the grace of God, but only by his own merit." Tracy tried to break in, but she stopped him and kept the floor herself. "I'm not through yet. I'm going to purge myself of the last vestiges of artificiality and pretense, and then start fair on your own honest level and be worthy mate to you thenceforth. My father honestly thinks he is an earl. Well, leave him his dream. It pleases him and does no one any harm. It was the dream of his ancestors before him. It has made fools of the house of Sellers for generations, and it made something of a fool of me, but took no deep root. I am done with it now, and for good. 48 hours ago I was privately proud of being the daughter of a pinchbeck earl, and thought the proper mate for me must be a man of like degree. But today, oh, how grateful I am for your love, which has healed my sick brain and restored my sanity. I could make oath that no earl's son in all the world. Oh, well, but, why, you look like a person in a panic. What is it? What is the matter?" "Matter? Oh, nothing. I was only going to say—" But in his flurry, nothing occurred to him to say for a moment. Then, by a lucky inspiration, he thought of something entirely sufficient for the occasion, and brought it out with eloquent force. "Oh, how beautiful you are! You take my breath away when you look like that." It was well conceived, well timed, and cordially delivered, and it got its reward. Let me see, where was I? Yes, my father's earldom, his pure moonshine. Look at those dreadful things on the wall. You have, of course, supposed them to be portraits of his ancestors, Earls of Rossmore. Well, they are not. They are chromos of distinguished Americans, all moderns. But he has carried them back 1,000 years by relabeling them. Andrew Jackson there is doing what he can to be the late American Earl. And the newest treasure in the collection is supposed to be the young English heir. I mean the idiot with the crape. But in truth, it's a shoemaker, not Lord Berkeley at all. Are you sure? Why, of course I am. He wouldn't look like that. Why? Because his conduct in his last moments, when the fire was sweeping around him, shows that he was a man. It shows that he was a fine, high-souled young creature. Tracy was strongly moved by these compliments, and it seemed to him that the girl's lovely lips took on a new loveliness when they were delivering them. He said softly, "It is a pity he could not know what a gracious impression his behavior was going to leave with the dearest and sweetest stranger in the land of... Oh, I almost loved him. Why, I think of him every day. He is always floating about in my mind." Tracy felt that this was a little more than was necessary. He was conscious of the sting of jealousy. He said, "It is quite right to think of him, at least now and then. That is, at intervals. In perhaps an admiring way, but it seems to me that... Howard Tracy, are you jealous of that dead man?" He was ashamed, and at the same time not ashamed. He was jealous, and at the same time he was not jealous. In a sense, the dead man was himself. In that case, compliments and affection lavished upon that corpse went into his own till and were clear profit. But in another sense, the dead man was not himself, and in that case all compliments and affection lavished there were wasted and a sufficient basis for jealousy. A tiff was the result of the dispute between the two. Then they made it up and were more loving than ever. As an affectionate clincher of the reconciliation, Sally declared that she had now banished Lord Berkeley from her mind, and added, "And in order to make sure that he shall never make trouble between us again, I will teach myself to detest that name and all that have ever borne it or ever shall bear it." This inflicted another pang, and Tracy was minded to ask her to modify that a little, just on general principles, and as practice in not overdoing a good thing. Perhaps he might better leave things as they were and not risk bringing on another tiff. He got away from that particular and sought less tender ground for conversation. "I suppose you disapprove wholly of aristocracies and nobilities, now that you have renounced your title and your father's earldom." "Real ones? Oh, dear no, but I've thrown aside our sham one for good." This answer fell just at the right time and just in the right place to save the poor, unstable young man from changing his political complexion once more. He had been on the point of beginning to totter again, but this prop shored him up and kept him from floundering back into democracy and renouncing aristocracy. So he went home glad that he had asked the fortunate question. The girl would accept a little thing like a genuine earldom. She was merely prejudiced against the Brummagem article. Yes, he could have his girl and have his earldom too. That question was a fortunate stroke. Sally went to bed happy too, and remained happy, deliriously happy, for nearly 2 hours. But at last, just as she was sinking into a contented and luxurious unconsciousness, the shaded devil who lives and lurks and hides and watches inside of human beings and is always waiting for a chance to do the proprietor a malicious damage, whispered to her soul and said, "That question had a harmless look, but what was back of it? What was the secret motive of it? What suggested it?" The shaded devil had knifed her and could retire now and take a rest. The wound would attend to business for him, and it did. Why should Howard Tracy ask that question? If he was not trying to marry her for the sake of her rank, what should suggest that question to him? Didn't he plainly look gratified when she said her objections to aristocracy had their limitations? Ah, he is after that earldom, that gilded sham. It isn't poor me he wants. So she argued in anguish and tears. Then she argued the opposite theory, but made a weak, poor business of it and lost the case. She kept arguing up one side and then the other the rest of the night, and at last fell asleep at dawn. Fell in the fire at dawn, one may say. Well, that kind of sleep resembles fire, and one comes out of it with his brain baked and his physical forces fried out of him. End of chapter 22.